Hello, everybody, and welcome into Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodities sector. My name is Jesse Day. Before we dive in, standard disclaimer: nothing here is investment advice. Do your own due diligence. And today's guest is the CEO of Leading Edge Materials, a company focused on developing a portfolio of critical raw material projects located in the European Union. It's Kurt Budge. Great to have you back on the show.
Hi, Jesse. It's good to see you.
Well, I want to start off with the European Union story and the legislation that's been coming out that is very favorable to critical materials over the last few years. We have seen the Critical Raw Materials Act come out last year from the EU, and this year in June, so very recently, the G7 Critical Minerals Action Plan was announced. Explain how that policy environment provides tailwinds for critical minerals projects like your own.
Yeah, so the Critical Raw Materials Act, which came out in March last year, 2024, really draws all member states into the same mission, which is to ensure security of supply and resilience in supply chains of critical raw materials. Before that, it was a little bit disparate because the European Union could have its objectives, but then each member state had its own sort of sovereign permitting processes. But everybody's singing off the same hymn sheet now with regards to what needs to happen. And specifically with the Critical Raw Materials Act, we had the strategic project application process. And the first list of projects was announced in March of this year. So that was 47 projects. And then some non-EU projects, but the EU signing bilateral agreements. So it's all starting to come together in terms of really supportive policy environment. But also, I was at the EIT Raw Materials event in Brussels a couple of months ago, and really everybody's saying, great, we've got the policy now. Now what we want to see is real action. And the EU can point to the fact that they've announced this list of strategic projects, but also public funding, so capital that needs to flow into developing the supply chain.
Great. And any light you could shed on the G7 Critical Minerals Action Plan and how that also plays a role?
Yeah, so I think it's really cool for us because we have a foot in Canada because we're registered in Canada and we're listed in Toronto, and we have a foot in the EU. And really, the Canada hosted the G7, and out of that was the same issues: diversification of supply, responsible production, encouraging investments, and the key driver for all of this is economic and national security. You know, with critical raw materials, the conversation over recent years has moved from one of the energy transition to one of defense and security, and clearly the war in Ukraine has really driven that conversation.
Well, let's talk about rare earth elements to kick off the conversation on the metals themselves. China recently restricting exports of certain key rare earths, at least potentially up until recently. We'll get into that in just a moment. But first, I would like to know your thoughts on the current macro tailwinds driving the rare earth elements market right now.
Well, rare earth elements is gets all the headlines, and it got a lot of headlines at the beginning of the year because when with the new Trump presidency and land grabs for Greenland and Ukraine. When it comes to rare earth elements, I don't think it will surprise anybody that China has dominated the supply chain, and that has been mining, but more importantly, processing and separating rare earths into their constituent elements, metals. And so what we have is it's a key source of critical raw materials that are necessary for permanent magnets, which go into wind turbines, electric vehicle motors, but also lots of defense applications. And with the geopolitical situation as it currently is, the ability to use trade as a weapon and restrict flows has caused a lot of concern. And so clearly what we see is that there might be a deal between the US and China in terms of allowing rare earth elements or permanent magnets to flow into the US, because industries have been suffering because, you know, when the tap gets turned off, which it has done in the past at different points in history, and more recently, supply chains aren't ready. So it's fundamental. What we see in Europe is a developing ecosystem around permanent magnets. And so what Europe wants to do is create that vertical supply chain, some of which is primary raw material production, some of which is recycling, but have its own capabilities. And that's starting to come together. I was in France in April, La Rochelle. Solvay, the company there, launched its permanent magnet project. And you had, politicians, financial institutions, the banks, and all the participants in the supply chain attending this event. So I think one of the benefits that I find of working in Europe is the great opportunity for innovation, collaboration, and partnership. So this is all happening. There's a lot happening. And I think that bodes very well for a project like Norra Share, because it's described as Europe's most advanced heavy rare earths project. And that should be flagged. It's heavy rare earths which are important to permanent magnets, and that's what makes Norra Share pretty unique.
Well, we'll get into Norra Share and the rest of your projects in just a moment, but first I want to focus in on this deal that China has made with the U.S. to allow exports of certain rare earths in exchange for the U.S. dropping some restrictions, some trade measures that have been taken against China. I'll read a quote here from CNN. China on Friday signaled it would approve the export of rare earth minerals to the U.S. hours after White House officials said the two sides had reached a deal in what would be a major breakthrough following weeks of negotiations over U.S. access to the key materials. So one of the main bullish arguments we always hear in favor of rare earths investment was China's throttling supply. So now this deal seems to be getting done. Does that become less of a concern? What are your thoughts there?
I think you've clearly got US government has been looking after its own interests. So I think in terms of the European conversation, it really doesn't change. And I think what we've seen and listening to Benchmark Intelligence did a piece on the BBC World News, World Service this morning in response to this. And really, I don't think this deal has changed the level of uncertainty around, this could all change, and it could change next week or it could change next month. And I think what consumers are, when they look upstream and they're thinking where the critical raw materials are coming from, they can't live with that uncertainty. We had in Europe in March, we had the European Commission put out a white paper around stockpiling. This was to do with military equipment, armaments, but also critical raw materials. And I've listened to the French government in recent months talk about the spotlight that they have on all critical raw materials that sit within France, both at a national level, if they choose to have their own stocks, but also within key industries, critical industries and their supply chains, and the responsibility on those businesses and companies to make sure that they have sufficient critical raw materials, whatever they need, to keep manufacturing if they're in a critical industry, the number one being defense. So, the deal that the US president has cut with China, all well and good. But I think from a European perspective, the necessity to still source rare earth elements both within Europe and, by doing bilateral deals remains exactly the same. It's critically important.
And your point about uncertainty makes a lot of sense, because what we've seen from the Trump administration is a lot of flip-flopping. Today, there could be a deal, a couple weeks, a month down the line, tensions could develop between himself and Xi or the US and China, and it could all be reversed or changed. So I think you're dead on there with the fact that markets cannot have that uncertainty, which makes it all the more important to have domestic supply in places like the EU. Let's talk about graphite for a moment here. What do you think are the current macro tailwinds driving the graphite space? Why is this a commodity that investors should be paying attention to right now?
Well, I think it's the same set of arguments for graphite, natural graphite, as it is for rare earth elements. China dominates the supply chain. They dominate mining, less so now than in recent years, but they dominate the value addition. So if you're talking about lithium-ion batteries and moving to spherical purified and coated graphite, they dominate the supply chain. And so in the same way that there have been restrictions on rare earths over time, it's the same case for graphite. And so again, it's the same set of arguments. Consumers are looking for supply chain security. So we've had inbound inquiries because clearly Leading Edge has got the Voxna graphite mine, which has sat on care and maintenance for a number of years in Sweden. We've had inbound inquiries from people that are downstream from us that specifically want to buy ex-China production. And that's the common theme. There's a diversification driver for Europe, but actually there's a supply risk for manufacturers, and they want to lock in ex-China supply. So that means that, as we'll probably come on to, that we're having a relook at the opportunity to restart Voxna.
Great. Well, let's pivot to Leading Edge Materials and how you fit into the picture here. It's been a while since I last had you on. A lot of new viewers have joined us since then. Could you start by giving us an overview of the company?
Yeah. So Leading Edge is Canadian registered, listed in Toronto and Stockholm, also in New York and Frankfurt. We're all critical raw materials, and all projects are located in the EU. So as I touched on there, we have a built and permitted graphite mine called Voxna in Sweden. We also have a heavy rare earths project, which is also benefited by significant quantities of industrial minerals, specifically nepheline syenite. That's called Norashare. And then lastly, we have an exploration alliance in Romania, where we have the first two we own 100% of, and the exploration alliance in Romania we have 51% of. And that's exploring for polymetallics in a former uranium mining area, brownfield exploration, drill rig underground. So yeah, from a exploration standpoint, really exciting.
So a lot of projects there, a lot of different metals. I want to talk about a press release you recently put out with updates on significant activities, including the exploration concession application for Norashare, the potential restart of the Voxna graphite project, and a major milestone in Romania there at Bihor Sud. Could you walk us through those details?
So with Norashare at the moment, we made a mining lease application last year in December. That's out for consultation now. So the process you go through in Sweden is where the regional governments get the opportunity to make comments, and then we'll be responding to those comments over the next couple of months. And then really with Norashare, we're looking at a decision on the mining lease, hopefully by the end of the year, the exploitation concession. That would be my hope. At the same time, we're looking at kicking off the pre-feasibility study. So, we're playing into these big themes that we've been talking about the need for primary raw material supply of something like heavy rare earth elements in the permanent magnet value chain that's being created in Europe. So we are driving forward in advance of getting the mining lease decision with the pre-feasibility study. We aren't starting from scratch. It's important to make investors aware of that. We've got 15 years of technical work. The first exploration permits were acquired for Norashare back in 2009. This project has had a previous mining lease back in 2013. The project as it is now is really a quarry at the extraction part. And the beauty of that is that it's a very simple mining process: extraction, comminution, magnetic separation to produce both a UG-like mineral concentrate rich in heavy rare earths, but also industrial minerals, nepheline syenite, for which there's also a strong business case. So a lot of momentum in terms of mining lease decision, hopefully by the end of the year, and then completing pre-feasibility in the first quarter of next year. That's Norashare. With Voxna, 2022, there was a restart plan done to look at the opportunity to get the mine back into production. I'm very unhappy when mines aren't working, so I'd love to see it actually product generated by that deposit again. And as I touched on, we've been receiving inquiries for natural flake graphite concentrate. And so the work that we're doing at the moment is to determine what upgrades we need to make to the existing plant to optimize its performance, produce the highest quality, highest grade flake graphite concentrate that we can produce. There was a scoping study done in 2021 about going down the anode materials route. That's a tough road to go down. But there are other projects within Europe that we can sort of talk to with regards to providing them with flake graphite concentrate. And we could, as I've described it, forward integrate into those customers that want security of supply. So we've got options for those collaborations. And again, I envisage that by the end of the fourth quarter, into the fourth quarter, we'll have completed the work on Voxner and know if we're making an investment decision to move forward. I think it's important to make the point with both NoraShare and Voxner that if you get those projects further down the technical study path, so pre-feasibility, and in the case of Voxner, a restart plan, then they become financially attractive to investors. Groups like the European Investment Bank, you've got the strong documentation that can have proper due diligence done on it. So that gives us great opportunities to look to alternative capital sources to get, as I touched on earlier, become a critical raw materials producer. And then lastly, with Bihor Sud, we've been focusing our efforts on what we describe in press releases as the G2 gallery. That has we've had a geological team in there doing mapping and channel sampling, and we've had a drill rig in there. We're about to switch to a new drilling contractor to really up performance. So I'm hoping that will start to deliver results. And really, we've got observations and assays of significant mineralization. What we haven't done yet is prove the scale of something that we can mine with sufficient grade. But as I touched on earlier, the thing about Bihor Sud is it's Tethyan belt, a large system of metal, and we're already underground. And as I've described it before, underground is something that we hope will turn into a deposit. We've already got access. And then lastly, in the update that I put out, we've been issued with operational ownership permits for the Avram Yanku former mine. So Avram Yanku was a major uranium mine, but also has all the metals that we've identified in other areas. So lead, zinc, copper, and silver. So there's plenty to go at. Again, exciting brownfield opportunity. We've got access to kilometers and kilometers of underground development. So we have to be very focused on what we're looking at, and that's what we are, very focused on, sort of defining something that we can mine.
Great. Well, let's talk about what the upcoming catalysts and news flow that shareholders can expect coming out of the company here in 2025 into 2026. As you mentioned, a lot of options on the table, a lot of developments that are moving along. Where are you going to be putting your focus?
Number one for me is NoraShare. By the back end of the year, I would hope that we get a decision from the mining inspectorate. These projects need to build momentum. That's what attracts investors and get stakeholders behind the project as well. So number one is the mining lease, and number two is the pre-feasibility study. And we're really excited about that because, and I didn't mention this before, we really underplayed the significance of industrial minerals to support the commercials of developing the NoraShare project. Back in 2021, we used prices in the region of $6 to $25 a ton. We're looking at producing 730,000 tons of nepheline cyanide a year, and we could have used $100 to $500 a ton if we proved it done sufficient marketing assessment work. So we believe there's significant upside to be achieved on the commercials for NoraShare, and the beauty of that is, it's a straightforward project, and my goal is, can we have this in production in 3 to 4 years? So those are the two key things with NoraShare. And then on Voxner, it's the reviewing the restart plan. And, we will come up with a study that we can hopefully make public by the back end of the year in terms of what that looks like. It'll be a stop-go decision that, for the reasons we've talked about, both heavy rare earths and graphite, customers want supply chain security. So we've got two key commodities that, they're not really commodities, are they? But we've got two key critical raw materials assets sitting in a really stable jurisdiction like Sweden. And we're looking to build momentum behind those projects and become a producer. And then lastly, in Romania, it's this drill rig that's going to go in and start turning. So, we're hoping to get some meters under our belt, and also so we've got G2 to go at, and then we've also got the starting to explore Avram Yanku. So yeah, I'm hopeful of plenty of news flow for investors.
Well, fantastic. Is there anything that we haven't yet discussed, or anything in particular that you'd like to emphasize to potential shareholders of Leading Edge Materials that you think is important?
I think coming out of that Critical Raw Materials Action Plan, you had this theme around responsible production. And I think that's very much something operating in Sweden, and I have been in Sweden working now since 2014, is that you're obliged, and we as a company want to work to the highest standards of ESG. So when we think about how we develop our projects, it's with a great focus on stewardship of the assets, the legacy that we're leaving behind, and in a word, responsible production. So first and foremost, across the company, those are the values we look to exhibit. And I think we're in a really dynamic period now where we're going to have some, getting a PFS on Norra Share is a big milestone. And the company has been there before because we had a PFS in 2015. It was just rare earths focused. And now we've got the added commercial benefit of the industrial minerals. So great project, and then lots of movement in other areas of the company. So yeah, exciting times ahead.
Well, I'm going to put a link in the description below to Leading Edge Materials website as well as social media so people can follow along with the company. Kurt, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks very much, Jesse. Good catching up.
Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.